So when we're talking about anger, there's no better poster child than right there, okay? I figured let's start with the self, right? That's where this whole thing begins. It begins and ends with the self. So, you know, I have really expressed this emotion a lot, especially recently for what I see in the world. Freedom of speech being just thrown on the ground and tread upon, you know? What are supposed to be our inalienable birthrights as human beings being practically discarded, okay? My anger recently has ranged from mild annoyance to white-hot rage, okay? What I want to talk about here today is the emotion of anger as something that can actually assist us. People see it always as negative, and we're going to talk about why that is. But if it's used properly, it can actually be a fuel of sorts, as I'm going to talk about. But what I hear from a lot of people in, you know, the audience, okay, the people who aren't actually doing the work, but who are absorbing it, taking it in, right? And, you know, not people who are at an event like this, but, you know, real armchair quarterbacks out there. We all know who people like that, you know, who can talk and talk and talk and criticize, but when you ask the question, what are you doing, you hear the crickets chirping, you know? So, you know, people will say, take Mark with a grain of salt, you know, or I don't trust his information because of it's coming from a place of anger, right? I'll hear, I've read on forums or on YouTube, why not listen to somebody else who presents it in a more calm, easygoing, dispassionate, disconnected way, you know, like not as emotionally involved, right? Somebody like Manly P. Hall. Now, I have great respect for the teacher Manly P. Hall. I think he is one of the greatest esoteric teachers ever, okay? However, if you listen to the dichotomy in styles between someone like me and someone like Manly P. Hall, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a very emotionally detached presentation style, whereas I tend to present with passion and emotion. That's my style. That's my personality. I have no intention of changing that. That's who I really am. That's who I've always been, okay? Now, I'm not saying you can't learn a great deal from Manly P. Hall or that you shouldn't. Absolutely take in his work, but be prepared to hear an older gentleman with an extremely monotone voice speaking slowly and dispassionately pretty much through the whole duration of his lectures. Now, people will say, because he's delivering it dispassionately, and sometimes I'm yelling into the camera, that somehow that will negate the truthfulness or the veracity of what I'm saying because it's delivered with righteous indignation, righteous anger. So my question here is, see, a lot of people want to work with other people's biases and their mental inconsistencies. I don't want to work with those things. I don't want to capitulate to those things. I want to point them out. I want to explain to people, here's a mind control technique that you've fallen prey to. Look at it. Ask yourself why. Is that your own thought? Or is that a virus that's been inserted into the mind that someone else wants you to think? So my question here is, when it comes to two radically different delivery styles, does delivery change the truth of the matter? Or does the truth remain the truth regardless of delivery style? And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, as we should realize that regardless of how something is said or presented, truth remains the truth. For people to believe that if you say it nice and calmly with a wonderful, sweet tone, that somehow that makes it more true than saying, you better fucking wake up and listen, because we're on a really bad path. And if we don't change it, there's not going to be much time left for us as a species. Does it make it any less true, how it is said? How about if we look at it on the flip side? What if we turn the tables completely and say, What about this delivery style? What about people who are paid propagandists for the powers that be in our world? Hired by intelligence agencies in many cases. What about their delivery style? Because they wear $3,000 suits and have their hair done at the finest salons and sit there, you know, looking as good as possible and delivering their absolute forked-tongue lies with a sweet and pleasant voice, does that make it any more true? See, we have to put these dynamics out there for people to consider. Why would anyone think, because someone may even be rambling in a completely frenzied way, that somehow has anything whatsoever to do with the truthfulness of what is being said? See, I don't listen for emotional aspects when something's being said. I listen for only one thing, and that is whether or not the information being spoken is true or untrue. And this is part of the logical reasoning process of being able to actually think for oneself, which we know that this control system, especially through education, is trying to violently rip away from people the ability to think critically like that. And that's why we don't even think about a lot of these things, about does delivery change truth? So when it comes to the prostitute media, does their delivery change the truth of what they're saying? I would suggest it absolutely does not. So as we explore this, I want you to keep those aspects in mind. And when any anger does come up or rear its head in your emotional response, you have to ask, is that actually coming from me? Or is that mind control virus that's been planted there by someone else, by social engineers?